If you've already turned to Exodus, wonderful. We're going to begin in verse 22 of chapter 15. Exodus chapter 15, verse 22. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made a decree and a law for them, and there he tested them. He said, "If you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." So Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him." "Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses also said. "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening, and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses told Aaron, "Say to the entire Israelite community, 'Come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling.'" While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God." That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Each one is to gather as much as he needs. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little. Each one gathered as much as he needed. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. Each morning everyone gathered as much as he needed, and when the sun grew hot it melted away. On the 6th day they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning." So they saved it until morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. "Eat it today," Moses said, "because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any. Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather it, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where he is on the 7th day. No one is to go out." So the people rested on the 7th day. The people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the desert when I brought you out of Egypt. So Moses said to Aaron, take a jar and put an omer of manna in it. Then place it before the Lord to keep for the generations to come. As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna in front of the testimony that it might be kept. The Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to the land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. An omer is 1/10 of an ephah. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses, and they said, give us water to drink. Moses replied, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? Then Moses cried out to the Lord, what am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me. The Lord answered Moses, walk on ahead of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord really among us? The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out and fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it. Because I will completely blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar, and he called it, the Lord is my banner. He said, for hands were lifted up to the throne of the Lord. The Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. Father, thank you for your word, for preserving these stories for us, and for revealing yourself to us. And would you teach us today as we study it? Teach us who you are. Teach us your interactions on behalf of your people, and teach us how we should respond to your character, to your activity, for we want to be obedient and faithful children. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen. That was some good stuff, wasn't it? I enjoy immensely reading these stories of God's work on behalf of people, and I am never ceased to be amazed at how applicable they are to our current circumstances. Even though we're not marching across a desert or looking to cross a Dead Sea or needing water in the desert, the actions and activities are so very similar in many ways, and there is so much for us to learn. Today I've organized the message into 4 points. We're really going to look at each of these 4 different sort of episodes or stories within this text. And in each case, I'm going to answer the question, God is, and I'm going to fill in that blank. So if you're taking notes, God is, and there will be 4 responses to this. God is. So first of all, in chapter 15, verses 22 to 27, the Israelites are without water. And this is a fairly common occurrence for them as they're traveling the desert, no surprise. And in fact, you're going to notice that there's a bit of a pattern, at least in the first 3 of these different episodes. There is grumbling, and there is testing, and then there is caring. And so if you want to further break down your notes, in each of the points there is grumbling, there is testing, and there is caring. And I didn't point it out in my notes, but I was reminded of it again as I was reading. There was another repetition, and it happened twice in those 4 episodes, and that was to write something down or to do something to remember what had taken place. I think that's an important thing for us to consider as well. It is good for us as we study these stories because they remind us. We are reminded of who God is and his activity on behalf of his people. And so first of all, grumbling. Exodus 15 verse 24. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what are we to drink? Now the Israelites are only a few days into the desert. They have witnessed many, many miracles of God, but they are very young and very early in their formation as a nation. It has really only just begun. And they grumble. They have not had a long history of God's faithfulness. In fact, according to their history, for 400 years, it appeared that God was silent and didn't care about them. And so it's really only been in the last very short period of time, a matter of months, where they've seen God act. And I think sometimes we look and we see those stories and we see God's incredible miracles and we think, come on, Israelites, smarten up. You just saw God do amazing things. But keep in mind that this was very new, a very new experience. They didn't have a long history of seeing God in action. And so they grumble. And it's a reasonable grumble. I have never been wandering around in a desert myself. I've never gone to the point where I was going to die of thirst. Maybe some of you, have any of you experienced a situation where you thought you were going to die of thirst? Nobody has. The fact that you're here tells me that you didn't die, so that's good news. It is a pretty serious thing to die of thirst. And so their concern, their worry, their fear is a reasonable concern. It is reasonable for people who are wandering around in the desert to be worried about the fact that they don't have water. And I think we should be careful not to jump all over the backs of the Israelites and recognize that this is a reasonable response. Now, they grumble as a result of it. And that is a pretty typical response, a pretty human response. In fact, I couldn't help but wonder, how often am I going through life, wandering around in life, and things aren't going the way that I think they should go, and I resort to grumbling? Maybe that happens to some of you, maybe you don't. I tend to be a bit of a grumbler. In fact, I found this entire message extremely convicting to me, because I am a professional grumbler, very, very good, and good at disguising it so that it doesn't look quite as grumbly, because it's holy grumbling after all, right? I get to preach once approximately every 10 years. I get to preach a message to you on something that I'm pretty good at. All the rest of the time it's like today, where there's a conviction for me. They were grumbling. And in their grumbling, they went to Moses. Now, going to Moses and Aaron is a reasonable thing. Moses and Aaron spoke on behalf of God, and so they brought their concerns to Moses and Aaron bring those concerns to God. It is important for us to recognize, too, that the way that God treats and interacts with the Israelites is very much like a father or a parent would do with a child. And that this is a very early stage of the growth of the Israelites. And so God's care for them is a lot more like one would care for a small child than for an adult. We think of the Israelites as adults and we think, why was God so patient with them? Why was he so caring for them? And I think it's important for us to recognize that even though they were physically adults, they were children when it came to their relationship with God. They were still new in that process. So after the grumbling came testing. In verse 25, there the Lord made a decree and a law for them, and there he tested them. Verse 26, he said, if you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all of his decrees. Now keep in mind, this was before the giving of the 10 Commandments. So what are the laws and the decrees that God has given to them? Well, in part, we're not entirely sure. There is one that he gives that talks about Sabbath. But for the most part, there doesn't seem to be a lot of laws or decrees given. It's almost as if God is saying to them, I'm going to give you laws and decrees, and when I do that, you best heed them. You best pay attention to them and follow them. Although again, it is certainly possible that he has given them some laws and decrees, and we don't have them written down. What we do also know is that God has placed morality and conscience in the heart of a person. And so even though these Israelites maybe hadn't received the actual law from God, they still had the law of God written on their hearts. Paul argues that in Romans, right? The Gentiles who haven't received the law have the law of God on their hearts to guide them. And so even before the receiving of the law, they already knew these things apparently regarding God. Moses said to the people in Exodus chapter 20, verse 20, Moses said to them, do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. The purpose of testing, and God does this frequently with his people, is to keep them from sinning, or maybe more specifically, to help them to grow. God is regularly and continually testing. This is not unique to the Israelites. This is still present today in your life and my life. Have you noticed God testing you in any particular points? Have you faced any challenging circumstances in which you were given the opportunity to obey or disobey? Every one of those is a test. And you notice that's basically a daily occurrence as we walk with the Lord. Are you all with me still? Okay, good. Excellent. I don't want to put you to sleep here. What does God do to test us? Well, he brings to us situations that will require us to trust him. That's what he does. He brings to us situations that will require us to trust him. That's the primary form of God's testing for us. This is what he was doing with the Israelites. He brought them to a place where they didn't have any water and they were thirsty. And then the question was going to be, are you going to trust me? And we talked about this last Sunday. It's the primary question that God asks his people. Will you trust me? Will you trust me? That's the testing that he brings. The circumstances are different today, but the questions are still the same. Will you trust me? And the whole point of each of those circumstances where God brings you to a place where you can trust is that you will grow and mature. Hence the description about the Israelites being young in their faiths, as it were, young as a nation. And it's the same for us. We are to be growing in our faith. As God tests us, it is to bring us to grow. Friend, if you've been a believer for a long period of time and you're not growing from the tests, that's an awful lot like an overgrown child. Someone who's still acting like a 5-year-old when they're 25. Have you ever heard that saying? Oh yeah, that's just, I should pick a name that nobody has here. That's just, try to pick Tony. That's just Tony. She's 15 going on 50. You ever heard that kind of a phrase? And that's the challenge, that often we sound like that as people. And so God's intention and his purpose is in testing people is to help them to grow and to train them. Now, is it God's intention for you to fail the test? That's not why God tests his people. He tests them to strengthen them and to help them to grow. All right, and then after the testing, we have his caring in verse 25. Then Moses cried out to the Lord. The Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. In verse 26 again, and I'll continue the verse there. He says, if you will pay attention to all of my commands and keep all of my decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. I am the Lord who heals you. God is healer, is the conclusion to the first point. God is healer. Jehovah Rapha is the way that's sometimes understood or remembered. God is healer. And God says here, if you're going to listen to the things that I've given you to do, then I will heal you. I will be the one who heals you and strengthens you. And that's important for us to recognize. And so here we have God. The Israelites grumble. He brings them a bit of a test, and it appears that they have failed it, which they did fairly frequently. So do we. And despite their grumbling and despite the failing of the test, guess what God still does? He still cares for them. He provides water for them, and he promises that he will be their healer. And that is the kind of God that we're talking about here. This is a gracious and kind God. In fact, for those people who think that there's no evidence of grace in the Old Testament, all they would have to do is take a look at these stories that we're talking about today. Because the people grumbled, God tested them and they failed, and then God cared for them anyway. Because he is a gracious, gracious God. And that's what he demonstrates here. And so we have one of the names of God listed for us here. In fact, all of our points will be a name for God for this morning's service. And so God was their healer. So I ask a couple questions. Is God still testing us? Are we still grumbling? Or are we being obedient and passing the test? I hope for some the answer is yes to that. But here's the good news. Regardless of whether or not you pass the test, God is still healer. He is still the God who will care for you. Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold me with thy powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Feed me till I want no more. Open now the crystal fountain, whence the healing stream doth flow. Let the fire and cloudy pillar lead me all my journey through. Strong deliverer, be thou still my strength and shield. Be thou still my strength and shield. God is our healer. And then God is provider. We'll see again the pattern: grumbling, testing, caring. In Exodus chapter 16, verses 2 and 3, in the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. It's a little melodramatic. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. Don't you remember you were slaves there? Well, selective memory, isn't that something humans are very good at? Maybe you're not so good at that. Selective memory. I'm really good at remembering the junky things, not always so good at remembering the good things. Perhaps the reason why God reminds them to write these things down, to have a record, something to be remembered by. But you brought us out in the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. How many people were in the assembly? Some have estimated there was 1 to 2 million people. Others have more conservative estimates saying there was more in the tens of thousands of people. It seems to make more sense, a smaller group of people, but it doesn't matter. It's a large group of people and they can't take care of themselves. Very much what like a small child is like. They can't yet take care of themselves. What's interesting is that when a small child is hungry and demands their food, they tend to do the same kind of thing, a little melodramatic. Have you ever had a little child slam their head on the ground because they're so hungry? Yeah, it happens. You do that? Okay, good. Thanks, Lincoln. Don't do that. It's bad for your noggin. And so they grumbled. And they grumbled. And that is a typical pattern that we're going to see in the early development of the Israelites. I hope and I pray for us as we're discussing this, that we are growing when it comes to grumbling as a people of God, that we are spending less and less time grumbling. It would be evidence of maturing. But another note about grumbling that I think is important for us to see here. In verse 8, Moses said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him." Who are we? You're not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. And I think probably some of us would say, "Well, I don't grumble against the Lord. That wouldn't be right or good." And yet, we are terribly tempted to grumble against those that the Lord has placed in authority over us. And Moses points out to the Israelites that their grumbling is not really against him, though they were grumbling against him, at least in their minds they thought they were. Moses says, "Your grumbling's not really against me. When you grumble against me as the leader of the people, you're really grumbling against God, who is the actual leader of the people." I found this to be very challenging for me and convicting, because there are times when I find it quite easy to grumble against the people that God has placed in authority over me. They're not doing it the way that I think they should do it. They're not living up to the standard that I think that they should live up to, and then I grumble against them. And it would be wise for me to recognize the gravity of that grumbling is actually grumbling against God. And so I think there's a warning and an encouragement for us. And then after the grumbling, testing, verses 4 and 5. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that will be twice as much as they gather on other days." And they did this for how long? For 40 years. Talk about mundane. There was a time ago where I thought I would try the carnivore diet, and I bought some ribeye steaks, and I was going to eat a ribeye steak, and I thought to myself, what a great way to live. I'm going to eat a ribeye steak every day. After about 7 days, I was sick of ribeye steaks. That's the coolest thing that I could think of to eat. Maybe manna was better than that, but 40 years of the very same thing. An incredible provision of God, but man, that must have been lame to eat the same thing day after day. 40 years of God's provision. Simple instructions though. Get up in the morning and go gather some. Just the amount that you need for you and your family members. And that's it. Simple instructions. Do them every day. Why was it so hard for people to follow? It wasn't that they were complicated instructions. It wasn't that somebody went, "Wait a minute, what are we supposed to do?" It's real simple. Go and gather enough for you and your family for that day. That's it. And yet there were still some people who were unwilling to follow. I can't for a second think that it was because they didn't understand. So when we reject against God's word and don't follow his simple instructions, is it because we don't understand them? Is it actually a mind problem? Is it an intellectual issue? No. In most cases, it's a volitional issue. It's a heart issue. I don't want to do it your way, God. I want to do it my way. My way is way smarter. I'll get enough for the whole week. It'll work out fine, see? And God says, look, I've given you simple instructions. Will you trust me? Will you trust me? In Isaiah 55, we read that God's ways are way higher than our ways, and his thoughts are way higher than our thoughts. Is it possible? This is going to come as a shock to some of you, so hold on. Is it possible that you don't know what's best and that God knows better than you? It's possible. It's not just possible, it's likely. And what I tell my children frequently, and we have this discussion often in our home, and I preach to myself when I'm having this discussion. If we are unwilling to follow God in the simple and easy instructions, don't you think it'll be even harder to follow Him in the more challenging and difficult instructions? If we can't get the simplest little instructions of God right, how in the world are we to think that we're going to grow up to be mature, godly men and women following the more difficult and challenging instructions of God? God is a wonderful, caring God. He is so patient, and He slowly teaches the people that they are to trust Him even with these simple little things. As a side note, by the way, man does not live by bread alone, is given in this text. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Let me back up. That was found in Deuteronomy chapter 8. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 3 to 5, God says, in reference to this episode, He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your fathers had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Your clothes did not wear out, your feet did not swell during those 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord God disciplines you. And so these tests are a test of trusting. Will you trust me? A test of obedience. Sometimes people think that the Christian life is all fun and games. In fact, there are some churches that teach that God wants you to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. I don't know what book they're looking in, because that's not in this book. This book says that the Christian life is challenging. People will say, come to Jesus. He'll make your marriage perfect. Come to Jesus. He'll make your finances perfect. Come to Jesus. All of those things. And although there is truth in them, to those that will submit their finances and submit their marriages, my guess is that those tests will be hard work and challenging opportunities to trust God. And so God is disciplining those He loves as He teaches them, as He trains them, as He helps them to grow and mature. And notice that phrase, man does not live by bread alone. They were to go outside to gather enough bread for that day. And the bread that we are to live on, and Jesus talked about this in the New Testament, is what bread? What bread are we to be living on? It's not manna. What's the bread we are to be living on? Thank you. Thank you for whoever proclaimed that. The Word of God is the bread that we're to be living. And does God's instruction any different for us in the collection of the Word of God each day than it was for the Israelites in the collection of manna? Does not God not say to us each day when you get up? Now there's not a specific verse perhaps that says this, but each day when you get up, take in some of the Word of God to help you grow and be strengthened for that day. Would it be good for you to read the whole week's worth in one day? Better than not reading it at all. But what would be best? A little bit every day. Because man doesn't live just by bread alone, but by the words that come from the mouth of God. Friends, if you're failing to see maturing take place in your life, if you're altogether identifying with the grumbling immaturity of the Israelites, perhaps it's because you are not taking in the Word of God each day, and therefore not growing as a result. That's a challenge for you. A little extra, you don't have to pay any bonus for that. And so God, they grumble, then there's testing, and then there's caring. And then there's caring. In chapter 16, 11, and 12, the Lord said to Moses, I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you'll be filled with bread. And this is not to be confused with the episode that happens in Numbers, where they were grumbling again. And it's a number of years along, and they should be more mature and older then. And then God says, in that circumstance, you want meat? Fine. It's going to come out of your nostrils. As children grow, we tend to be more aggressive in their training and discipling. But here, early on in the process with the Israelites, God is again gentle and caring for them. And even though they grumble and complain and were quite melodramatic, God says, okay, I'll bring you some meat. You'll get a full tummy's fill of meat in the evening, and in the morning your bread will come. And that's exactly what God does for them. And in so doing, He demonstrates His provision for His people. Now, God is not declared Yahweh or Jehovah Jireh in this particular text, but this is a specific example of that. God is providing for His people. You may recall back in Genesis chapter 22, where Abraham takes Isaac out and is to sacrifice him on the altar. And at the last minute, the angel of the Lord stops him, and a ram is there in the thicket. And in that moment, in Genesis chapter 22, Abraham recognizes that God, Yahweh, is provider. He provided. And of course, there's way more going on there than just the salvation of Isaac specifically, but the provision of Jesus Christ as our great provider. But here we're being introduced to God. Who is He? Well, God is their provider. God is provider. And He's still providing for us. We're still grumbling. He's still testing. And He is still graciously providing for you and for me. Amen? Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Mercies new every morning. We get that from Lamentations chapter 3. Plenty of other places in Scripture. Daily, He is providing for us. For God is Yahweh, or Jehovah Jireh. And then God is with us. In chapter 17, the pattern continues. Grumbling, testing, caring. No surprise. It continues. In verse 3, but the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? Boy, they're really ratcheting it up. Now they're really worried about the animals too. The problem with grumbling, well, there are many problems with grumbling, but one of the problems with grumbling is that left unchecked, it tends to do what? It gets worse. In fact, you might say it gets grosser. The problem with grumbling is that it gets worse. It gets a little bit more sickening. Our grumbling gets to be more brazen and probably more melodramatic. And we include more things, and somehow it builds momentum. And if we let grumbling take place in our lives, then it becomes quite a sickening thing, as it was happening in the lives of the Israelites. Their grumbling was getting uglier and uglier. Their demands were getting greater and greater. And once again, they were a lot like 12 going on 30. They're demonstrating their lack of maturity. And then God tests them. But in this case, God's not the one doing the testing. Notice who is doing the testing now. Exodus chapter 17, verse 7, and he called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? This is what happens with grumbling. Grumbling becomes an incredible sense of entitlement. And entitled people are the ones who are putting God to the test. It is no longer just God testing them, but them testing God. What does it mean to test God? Well, it means to put Him on probation, as it were. It means to say, I'm going to withhold my trust from you, God, until you provide for me that thing. Whether it's a thing that He's promised He'll provide or a thing that we think that He should be providing for us. What we do in effect is saying, we're not going to trust you, God. You don't deserve to be trusted. We're going to withhold our trust from you until you pay up. Until you show us your presence. That is an ugly culmination to grumbling. Challenging God. Demanding that He should prove His worth. Demanding that He should make good on that which we think is important. That is the kind of testing that the Israelites began to do with God. They were demonstrating a lack of faith, and they were clearly demonstrating a lack of obedience. And we have to ask ourselves, if there isn't a time where we have begun to test God, where we have decided that we were angry at Him because He didn't provide the way that we thought He should. He didn't lead in the way that we thought He should. He didn't do the things in the way that we thought He should. And we shake our fists with Him and say, well, God, you need to get it straight because I might not be with you for long if you don't. I hope and I pray that none of us have ever done that. And I hope and pray that if we ever have, we have repented on our knees. But notice how God responds to the Israelite people, despite their grumbling, and despite their petulance, despite their immaturity in the way that they've treated him, look at how God responds. In verse 6, I will stand there before you by the rock of Horeb, strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. And so Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. They were saying, if you're not even really here, are you? Are you even really here? Prove it. I'm always a little nervous when people want God to prove something. I think it would be best to stand back a little bit. But actually, God is incredibly gracious. God is incredibly caring. Despite their lippiness, He provides for them and cares for them, and in so doing, answers their question. What was their great question? Is Yahweh really with us? And sometimes we ask that question. Is God really with us? Is He really here? And we might think of that as a simple and innocent question, but I want you to understand and recognize that it is not. That is a bit of a vulgar question. To question God's presence and His sovereignty is a bit of a vulgar question. He is faithful, new every morning His mercies. Over the course of history, has He ever left us? I was hoping there'd be an answer there. No. Then why in the world would we question Him and say, are you even really here? Now I understand in our heart, and perhaps if we do that in a humble manner, but I would be really careful about those kinds of statements. They reveal your heart, not God's. God with us. Interestingly enough, God in His great care provides for the people, demonstrating His presence. And in fact, this whole Exodus, this whole gathering of the people of Israel and making them into a nation and freeing them from slavery in Egypt and leading them on this quest through the desert and bringing them into the promised land was all for a purpose. And it wasn't because Israel was awesome. God says that, Paul says that in Romans. It wasn't because you were awesome, but rather because it was God's plan and His intention to bring through the Jewish people the Savior who would save all of us, who, by the way, went by the name God with us. In Matthew 1:23, the virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. God with us. And over thousands of years, literally, God has been answering this question. And people continue to throw up their fists and say, is God really here? And God patiently and tenderly and with incredible loving care says, yes, I'm still here. I'm with you. I don't know what test you're facing today. I don't know whether or not you're grumbling regarding the test you're facing. I don't know if your grumbling has gotten to the point where you're testing God. Perhaps you're even questioning whether or not He's here. And God in His gentle tenderness says, yes, I am here. I am with you. Because He is, after all, Emmanuel. Be Thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Not be all else to me, save that Thou art. Thou my best thought by day or by night. Waking or sleeping, Thy presence my light. Be Thou my wisdom, and Thou my true word. I ever with Thee, and Thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, I Thy true Son. Thou in me dwelling, and I with Thee one. God is with us. And then, finally, and we'll bring this to a conclusion, God is victor. Now, in this last section, there is no record of grumbling and testing. I suspect that both were still present. I suspect that both were still present. Consider that the Israelites have grumbled in all circumstances leading up to this, and now there's some people coming to kill them, and it is most likely to assume that they again grumbled. In this case, God skips all past that. And I think it's important for us, because I think it's too easy for us to get hung up on the grumbling and get hung up on the testing and miss the real point of what these texts are trying to teach us. These texts are less concerned in teaching us what men are like, and more concerned in teaching us what God is like. And so that is the focus in this last section. No grumbling and no testing, but I suspect that they were both present if we got down to the nitty-gritty of the circumstances. Joshua was to pick some men. It makes it sound like there was a lot of fighting men and he had to pick the best ones, a la a Gideon or circumstance, but that's actually not the way that should be understood at all. Really, what Joshua was doing was going through the people to find anyone that could actually fight. That's what he was doing. Probably looking for someone who had anything that might be resembling of a weapon of some kind. Keep in mind, these people weren't a fighting people. They weren't equipped for war. They hadn't trained in battle. This is probably a circumstance where Moses was like, man, I sure hope there's a few folks here that can actually fight. So they went and found the biggest, toughest, meanest looking guys. And they said, let's go to this battle. And in this circumstance, and you've heard this story before, as long as Moses' hands are up, but what's actually important is not his hands. I never really thought about it that much before studying for this particular week. It wasn't actually Moses' hands that were the issue. We think hands raised to God, that must be important. Actually, what was in his hands was what was important. Did you notice, as we were reading the text, what was in Moses' hands? The staff of the Lord. It was the staff of the Lord. It was the staff that represented the power and the authority of the Lord. And that's what was significant, not his hands, but the staff of the Lord. In other words, as long as the Lord was being lifted up to his place of prominence where he belonged, as long as that was being understood and recognized by the people, then the battle was going in their favor. The moment his hands came down and the staff of the Lord came down and the people forgot who it was that was providing the victory for them, then they began to lose the battle. It doesn't say exactly how the fight was won. It doesn't give any details other than when the staff was raised, then the Israelites were winning, and when the staff was lowered, they were losing. Who's in charge of that? Who's the one controlling that? Was it that Joshua's team and his fighters were invigorated when they saw the arms go up and they lost heart when the arms came down? I doubt it. I think it has everything to do with the fact that God was demonstrating another part of his character. At the end of this text, it says that he was referred to there, the place was referred to as Jehovah Nissi, or our God is our banner. And I think that's a bit of a misunderstanding for us, because when we think of banner, we think of things a little bit differently. So for example, yesterday, my next door neighbors, Caleb and Abigail, had a drive-by birthday party. It was very awesome. Really creative by Stacy to do that, and a good way to bless her kids in these days of social distancing. And Amariah made a banner for them. It was a poster board that said happy birthday to Abigail and to Caleb, and it was placed there for all to see. And that's what when we think of a banner, that's what we think. But again, the circumstance here wasn't so much a worded poster, but rather the staff of the Lord being raised, and it was the victor's staff, or the staff of the victorious warrior. And so I think a better way of understanding the description of God here in this particular text is not a banner with words, but rather declare it as the victorious warrior, or I'm just simply going to use the word victor. God was the victor. Now, we want to bring this to a close. Is God still the victor? Has anything changed in these many, many, many years since the writing of this story? Since God demonstrated himself with the power as the victorious warrior, has anything changed? Now we look around us sometimes and we see the circumstances of our lives and our communities and our culture and our country, and we might wonder if God is victor. And I think it's important for us to be reminded. This text reminds us of that God is still our victor. He is still victorious. So we bring this to a conclusion. Oh, let's sing one more song here before we bring it to a conclusion. We worship you, God of our fathers, we bless thee. Through life's storm and tempest, our guide hast thou been. When perils o'ertake us, escape thou wilt make us. And with your help, O Lord, our battles we win. Let me read to you a passage of scripture from 1 Corinthians 10 as our conclusion. You're going to really love the last verse of this section because it surprises you. 1 Corinthians 10, 1 through 13. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food, and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in pagan revelry. We should not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test the Lord, as some of them did, and were killed by snakes. And do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel. These things happened to them as examples, and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. So if you think that you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, He will provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. We hear that last verse often, but we often fail to hear it in its context. The testing and the struggle of the people of Israel, and it's recorded for us as a warning so that we will not follow the same example, and as encouragement, as a reminder that we have that rock, Christ, and the Word of God, and that He is faithful and will protect us and strengthen us when we are tempted to grumble, when we are tempted to shake our fist at God, when we are tempted to betray Him. Loved one, what is God doing in your life today? He's likely testing you. But that's what a good father does. Are you grumbling and complaining at the testing He's bringing you? My guess is that the test will continue as long as you're continuing to grumble and complain. So you see, when we fail a test, we generally have to take it over again. Or are you trusting and obeying? Are you growing through the test? Are you maturing and becoming more Christ-like? Good news, you probably won't have to repeat that test. Not so good news, a bigger test is coming. Another test. But here's the encouragement. No matter what test you're in, no matter what spot in the progress of maturing and growing as a child of God, regardless of your responses, God is still healer. God is still provider. God is still with us. And God is still the victor. Amen? Father, we praise You and thank You for Your word, for the challenge that it is for us, the encouragement that it is for us. Use it, Lord, to sanctify us. Your word is truth. Sanctify us by the truth. Would You help us, Father, to mature and to grow to godly men and women who trust You and obey You and follow Your word in the simple things and in the hard things. Thank You, Father, that regardless of our response, You still care, and You are still kind, and You are still generous, and You are still gracious. And even though You do discipline us, You are always healer, provider, with us, and victor. We praise You in the name of Jesus. Amen. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above, ye heavenly host. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. And now the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.